Oh, that's my position. It's absurd to have any belief in egalitarianism on its face, because it's not actually possible except through the graciousness of men.
It's absurd to have egalitarianism because women cannot physically enforce their own rights, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So egalitarianism is not, it's not true. It's not real. It's false. It's only possible through men, in other words. It's not possible through women. Women can't be equal unless men allow them to be equal, which means it's paradoxical, because this means that they're never going to be equal, because men are going to always be the arbiters of what that equality is, because women can't enforce it. So,
but why does the notion of egalitarianism have to be predicated on physical strength, or like who gets to enforce it?
Well, what else could it be predicated on?
Principles of like what's best for society.
And what happens if somebody violates those principles?
Equal,
sure.
Like, why would it be based off the enforcement?
What happens if somebody violates those principles?
What do you mean?
Well, so if you have a society in which you have laws and government and things like this, and whatever social contracts you come up with, what happens if one side violates those principles, or a person or an individual or a group violates those principles? What would you do with them? You would, well, I would think, arrest them maybe, or punish them, or do something punitive, or put them in prison or something like that. And so you're right back to the enforcement mechanism again. So there's really no way around it. The enforcement mechanism is from men, will always be from men. And so it's paradoxical to say that women can have equal rights, because even if they do have equal rights, it's just because men have allowed them to.
But does that make women's equality laughable, or like an absurd idea?
Well, it's paradoxical on its face, so it has to be laughable, because there is never going to be such thing as women's equality, just an illusion thereof. Because if it's decided by even a small majority of men, majority being like 10, 15, 20%, they just won't have it anymore, and there's nothing they can do about it. So essentially, always they have to defer to men for this.
I guess, would you apply the same logic to race? Like if someone's a racial minority and then a larger racial majority just decides like, we're going to overpower you physically and with enforcement mechanisms?
Nope, it wouldn't work the same way. It would just be the same man paradox. So if men decided to take rights away from a single group of men, they could do that, yes. But let's say if it was a racial minority of women, or something like this, that wanted to take away rights, or even if it was a racial majority of women who wanted to take away rights from a minority of men, they likely couldn't do it without using men as enforcement. So it always comes back to this no matter what. So it'll be, in this particular case, if you're talking about race, it would be, yes, groups of men can take away rights for whatever reason based on whatever proxy they have from other men, and have always been able to do so.
Okay, I guess I just disagree that makes women's equality laughable, because we would need a male.
Well, then explain how you can be equal.
Because I don't think equality is predicated on physical strength. I don't think equality is necessarily predicated on whether you're able to enforce it yourself.
Then what's it predicated on? What's a right predicated on? Where do you think a right comes from, absent enforcement of the right?
I mean, conservatives will argue that, a lot of fetuses in the womb have rights, even though they can't physically defend themselves, that they're still worthy of human rights.
So what you're saying there,
defend for themselves. So does that mean that fetuses shouldn't be deserving of human rights if you are pro-life, because women could just decide to just abort them?
So this is question begging, right? So I'm asking you, where do rights come from? And you say, well, conservatives will say that children in the womb have rights. Well, that may be true or may be false, but that doesn't actually answer my question, which I'm asking you, where do you think rights come from?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is where they don't come from is physical strength.
I don't care where they don't come from. I want to know where they do come from. Where do they come from?
I guess it's subjective. Like, some people think it comes from just a religious sense of, you're a person, you're deserving of human rights, you're deserving of prosperity and happiness. Or you could argue that, I guess it depends what you think are fundamental rights, like which rights.
Well, that's the question I'm asking you, is if you don't have an explanation or grounding for why you think that people should have rights at all, or where rights even come from, then what else could they be other than an enforcement mechanism by groups of people for what they think other people should be allowed to do or not do?
I don't think because I don't have a clean definition of where rights come from, that means that I have to just defer that rights should just come from who can physically enforce them.
Where else could they come from then?
If there's no clean definition, it means that tyranny is what dictates rights.
Well, no. Well, in your case, for democracy, you might say it's a tyranny of majority, or you could say that it's not a tyranny because it's the majority. It wouldn't really matter which way you framed it. The truth of the matter is, though, is that you have to at some point contend with this issue, which is if you don't think that there's a grounding for rights and they're just all subjective based on cultures and people groups and things like this all over the world, that's fair enough. But then you would have to also say in that same breath, if they're all just subjective, then who's giving them to who? And who can take them away from who?
Sure. So I guess rights are established within a civilization. Or usually within national borders. It's decided like what do people need in order to have a prosperous life or to have like an equal opportunity? I'm just saying usually the physical enforcement is there to ensure a bottom line, to ensure that people at the bottom, even if they're handicapped, like I just don't understand why this example is you're using it to apply it to women.
Well, the Greeks said that without law, there can be no freedom. And what they're saying there is if you don't have an enforcement arm for what keeps you free, being like things like a military, things like police, things that are enforcement laws, in other words, you can't actually enforce any of these rights. How could you possibly do it? So since men are the enforcement arm, there's really no way out of the fact that you get your rights from them, whether you like it or not. You could say that egalitarianism as a principle is great, but that really is just begging the question again as to who's giving you your rights. You're not giving them to yourself. So in other words, Farha, you didn't wake up one morning with rights of which you gave yourself. You have rights which other people allow you to have and can easily take away if they so chose, and there wouldn't be anything you could do about it. That's my whole point.
Sure, your entire neighborhood one day can just decide, we hate Andrew, he's annoying, he's not mowing his lawn, let's go kill him. Does that mean your rights are laughable?
Not if they were women.
Overpowered by a larger
Not if they were women. They could do that if they were men, though. I agree. I would agree that men could
I'm
likely...
pretty sure 20 women could come and just decide we're going to overtake Andrew because he's not mowing his lawn.
I think it would be far more difficult for them to enforce it than 20 men. Wouldn't you agree? And I think that they would probably appeal to men in order to exercise the enforcement, which is what they do right now, which is what women do right now. They appeal to men to exercise all enforcement of all of their rights and all of the things that they want. They can't appeal to women because women can't enforce their rights and never have been able to.
5 women or like 3 women, 2 men come tomorrow, kidnap you, tie you to a chair and start beating you. And I say, oh, well, he can't fight back right now. We're the one who decides if he eats or sleeps or gets water. Does that mean your rights are laughable? The basis of your rights are laughable? That makes no sense.
So what you're no.
Enforcement mechanisms are subjective. So if I decide
hang on.
put you under a tyrannical situation and torture you,
actually, you're making my point. You're making my point for me. So if my rights are being violated and I'm unable to physically do something about it, so 2 men and 3 women have tied me up. They're now depriving me of life, liberty, and happiness by doing this, and I can't physically do something about this. Who would I appeal to do something about this?
If you can't appeal to someone, it means the basis of your rights are laughable.
Yeah, unless you can tell me what the basis of rights are, which is what I've asked you in the beginning.
The legal basis of your rights.
Yeah, I know, but what is the legal basis of the rights come from what?
In America, it comes from the Constitution.
Which came from?
Currently, the Constitution can only be amended legally. Like, I don't think men can just overpower that right now.
Really? They tried to before in the Civil War.
Currently,
why? What's the difference between now and then? They tried to once before. What do you mean? So if men don't like the hand that they've gotten, they don't like the nation that they're in, they don't like the government that they have, they don't like the circumstances they're in collectively, they seem to be able to do something about that. They can overthrow the entire nation, for instance. Can you point to a country in history you can ever think of where women have collectively overthrown the nation with force?
Okay, so by enforcement mechanism, you don't mean through like legal or civil measures. You mean through like revolution and
Those
other.
are both physical measures. A legal measure is a physical enforcement. How else could it how else could it work? Like what stops you from breaking the law? It's a penalty, right? Doesn't somebody enforce the penalty?
I'm just saying revolutions could be spearheaded by anyone. I just don't understand why this is like such a gendered idea for you that like women's rights are laughable because a majority could overtake them. Like that's the case with any larger group of people.
It's not the case. So for instance, let's say you had a dynamic where you had 20% men to a 80% female ratio. The men would still be in charge. We
I
know
don't know if
this.
that's true.
Well, not only can I demonstrate that this is true by showing you nations post-war, where a lot of the men, up to 2/3 in some cases, were completely wiped out and the men were still in charge. The reason is because even then, the power dynamic is it's sloped such in the favor of men that women still need them to enforce their rights. Women are unable to physically do this type of work themselves, at least collectively. There might be individual women who are able to be police officers, great military officials, things like this. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm talking about on average and in generalities here. And in general, no, women can't enforce rights and have never been able to. Their rights collectively come from men.
Okay, so women's rights are laughable because men, if needed, can use enforcement mechanisms, whether legally or just purely physically, to overpower them. Are children's rights also then laughable?
Hang on, back up.
Parents can just
Because
decide
you're actually straw manning, right? Remember,
okay,
I said the word egalitarianism, meaning equality. Equality is laughable, not women's rights, not giving rights to women, in other words. But egalitarianism and equality is laughable because it's paradoxical. And the great paradox of it is that you would be appealing to the same group of people who can then take your rights away while at the same time considering yourself equal to those people. It's laughable. It's a paradox.
I just don't know if that's a good basis. Like, I don't think you're less than of a human because you are missing a leg or because you're of older age and you probably can't fight back against the younger generation. Gen Z can decide today, we're going to kill off Gen X. Does that mean
there's a terrible argument too, because I'm not, you're again straw manning. I'm not talking about a person who has a disability, for instance, being a lesser or greater human being. That has no merit to the argument. Laughable? Yeah, I'm saying to you that it's not that women are lesser human beings. In fact, I consider them the same as far as how they should be treated. They should definitely be treated with respect and dignity and all those wonderful things that we would expect in society for everybody to treat everybody that way. But that's not going to change the grounding fact that that their rights come from men and are enforced by men.
Are senior citizens' rights laughable? Is their equality laughable? Not saying that, not strawmanning you by saying that you're assuming they're less than. Is their equality laughable because they could be physically overpowered by Generation Y, Generation Z?
Well, okay,
because we could just decide like
this is actually
right to vote from senior citizens.
Yeah, so this is
overpower them. We could decide to
listen,
nursing homes.
Listen, you're actually you're making a pivotal mistake here. If you're saying to me, like, can men take rights away from other men? The answer is yes. Yes. Can men take rights away from women? The answer is yes. Can women take rights away from men? The answer is no. No, they can't.
Really?
Yes.
Millennial women can't take away rights from senior citizens?
No. Not unless men allow it. Because if men decide collectively not to allow it, there's nothing you can do. In other words, you can never
co-gendered decide to take a right away from an older generation co-gendered. Like, I just don't understand where this like.
Yes, men can still take rights away from men. This has been established 50 times. But women can't take the rights away from men. That's the problem that you have, is that even if all of you collectively came together tomorrow, like, let me ask you this, just reasonably think about this. Say the entirety of the human race decided one day that they were going to go to war with each other, all of the men and all of the women. Who do you think would win?
All of the men. I'm not disputing the fact that men could overpower women.
Now, hang on. For the rest of the thought exercise, pretend for a second the entirety of all of women went to war with 20% of the population of men, and all the other men stayed out of it, who do you think would win?
Honestly, I don't know. I think war is more about is about other things than just physical strength. It's about like weaponry. It's about how you can strategize. So I don't
Andrew,
know.
are we assuming a world without like modern weapons and modern technology, just like kind of like
even in a world with modern weapons and modern technology?
Okay.
Even then,
80%. I would honestly, in that case, I'm being honest. I genuinely think women in that case.
why?
We're using modern technology.
Yeah. So why do you think that women who are generally speaking inept with technology, generally, we're not saying all women, but generally speaking, they're inept. We know this because of who goes into the technological and STEM fields when we have egalitarianism. Guess who it still is? It's men. They overwhelmingly are the engineers. They are overwhelmingly the people who fix everything in society. They're the ones who create and operate that very same technology. I don't think that highly specialized tech like that, even then, would be something that women could easily deploy against even 20% of men. You're talking about something here. If you scale it up, you start to kind of recognize how lopsided the power dynamic really is and always will be. There's not anything that can be done about it. That's what makes this a great paradox. To appeal to men for rights and at the same time say that you're equal to men is laughable.
Sure, you didn't say all of women and all of men in this instance. You said 80% women, 20% men.
Even then,
so
yeah.
Even then, there could still be, even though less women go into STEM, in that 80% pool, there could be more women who are technologically inclined.
I still think they would lose. I still think if you were, I still think they would lose. But the thing is, the point being is that even if they wouldn't, in that particular case, just that one particular case, maybe it just took 30% of men, whatever the collective was.
Okay.
The power dynamic is ridiculously
technologically inept. Senior citizens are also technologically inept. If you put all of
men can take rights away from men for the 300th
millennial
time.
women against all of senior citizen men, I think women would win in terms of warfare technologically.
Okay, listen, hang on.
Andrew, let her finish.
Yeah, but she's strawmanning the entire position. She doesn't understand it.
She's not interrupting you. Just let her finish.
No, he can
go ahead.
Go on.
Okay, go ahead.
Listen, you're strawmanning their position. I think you don't understand it. You can have great monoliths of one versus the other and possibly overwhelm them. That's really not the point. It's that if all the millennial women were to decide tomorrow that the senior citizens needed to lose all their rights, they would still have to appeal to men in order to allow that to happen. So if all the other men were like, nope, they still have rights, women still couldn't do anything. That's my point.
Why would we have to appeal to them? This thought experiment involved warfare. If you're at war, who are you appealing to? You're just relying on your technological what?
For whatever the disbursement is, okay? Let's say it's like 200 to 1, right? So men can take out like 20 women to 1 woman. It's fine. Or let's just say it's 2 to 2, 2 to 1. It doesn't really matter, right? What I'm saying is that as long as men are involved in governance, as long as men are involved in society, you and your rights and your appeals to take rights away or give rights to any group of people at any time has to necessarily be an appeal to men. So even within the confines of the thought experiment, if we took all of that out, well, I could just yield the entire thing to you and say, sure, maybe in that instance, I'll just give it to you. It just doesn't really matter, though.
I'm not refuting that you have to appeal to other people for your rights. I'm refuting that appeal means that your equality is laughable. Same way you probably wouldn't argue that just because a senior citizen, again, has to appeal to the general public, most of whom are younger, most of whom are more technologically inclined than them. Like I said, even a millennial woman is more technologically inclined than a senior citizen man probably at this point. That doesn't mean their equality is laughable.
Listen, the senior citizens who are men understand, just like all men do, that other men are in a position to take their rights away anytime they choose, unless you have some type of collective that can stop that. That's why we have a military. That's why we have all these different things to enforce the rights. This is well understood. You claiming, wait a second, what if a bunch of women got together to take the rights away from senior citizens? Well, they could do that, but you would have to bank on all of the other men outside of that, external to that, allowing you to do that, because if they said no, you couldn't. Whereas if the roles were reversed and a group of men were to decide to do that, they could. And if you opposed it, you couldn't stop it. That's the difference.
Okay, I still don't see the equivalency between needing to appeal to majority and meaning that your rights are laughable. But I guess if your basis of rights is based off physical enforcement, then
No, listen, this is fundamental and pivotal to any argument you'll ever make in your entire life. All of your rights are based on enforcement unless you can give me a basis for them outside of that.
that just can't be the case, because the notion of rights wouldn't need to exist. We wouldn't need to establish rights for people if each person could physically enforce it themselves. The whole point of establishing baseline of rights is because you're assuming people are fundamentally different physically and intellectually. So how can you say your rights don't matter because you're physically inferior when that differentiation is what justifies your rights in the first place? That's why we even establish rights.
You haven't justified rights at all. You just say this is what justifies them, the fact that there's inferiority between different people. Okay, is that the justification? That the justification for rights is based on inferiority? Is that what you're saying is your justification
Not
for a
inferiority, I
right?
said differences.
The differences is the
Saying if each
justification.
person was as intellectually and physically capable as the person next to them, I don't think we would need to establish human rights.
Okay, so
Probably.
So you think that rights then come from your mind? They don't come from any external source, just people make them up.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if absent something for you to ground this axiom on, unless that's all it is, just like a pure axiom to your own preferences, you'd have to tell me what you're justifying having a right on, where it comes from. Where does a right actually come from? Other than your mind, you made it up. If that's the case, then you have a big problem. So did it come out of the people's minds, or does it come external? Did they come from God, like our founders said, or where do they come from?
I'm asking you, where do rights come from for you? Because I'm saying
God.
I think rights. What?
I think that well, as far as innate human rights, the way that you perceive them, we don't perceive them the same way. But I would say that I ground all of my epistemology and ontology on my faith. So all the things that I think are informed by faith and would be informed by God. But from your perspective, your secular perspective, you're just saying that rights are just something that people made up one day. And then you say, but enforcement isn't necessary, which is really bizarre and makes no sense. And I'm trying to get you to square it.
Necessary. I said enforcement is crucial to rights.
Then rights come from men. If enforcement is crucial to them, men are the enforcers of those rights, not women. So therefore, you're basically begging men for rights.
What the majority establishes is those rights. But I'm saying just because your rights can be taken away, how does that make the basis of equality laughable?
Because it means that you would always be appealing to people who can take your rights away as being equal with you when you can't take theirs away.
You can take them away, but does that make it justified?
Nope, you can't take them away. Men can take them away, but not women. Women can't take men's rights away. Not monolithically.
If a majority of voters decide to change the basis of rights, again, they could take it away from the minority of senior citizens.
Well, first of all, we're not in a democracy. We're in a republic, and it takes more than a simple majority, of which women do outnumber men, but it's only slightly so. They would still need even men in that coalition to do so. So women, as a singular entity, can't do anything outside of voting. But even with voting, they would need men. But absent voting, they certainly can't enforce their rights, whereas men can enforce their rights even absent voting. So if we don't like what's going on at the ballot box or in the nation or in the country, we can physically do something about that. We can change the regime. We can change the president. We can change whatever the fuck we want. And society basically just has to deal with it. There's nothing that they can do about it. They're at the mercy of men. So men are at the mercy of men and women are at the mercy of men. But all of them are appealing to men for rights.
Okay, so you said you're a Christian, right? So you believe in a theological basis for rights. So what do you see as rights then, since you have a more objective understanding of them? Since mine's secular.
I don't think that we have innate rights the way that you think that we have innate rights. I think that we have an obligation and duties to follow certain virtues, and that those virtues might oftentimes run contrary to what you might consider an innate human right, of which I don't consider an innate human right. So examples of this might be, I don't know, discrimination, let's say, against transgender people using the bathroom or something like this. I don't consider that to be virtuous. And so I would be against such a thing, even though a person like you might say, well, wait a second, this is a fundamental human right or something like this. The difference is that all of my positions on that are informed, and I'm basing all of it, grounding all of it on the Bible and on God. You're grounding all of everything you believe is right, just basically out of your own brain, what you think subjectively is a right and what isn't.
Okay, so what do you then see as fundamental human rights?
Fundamental? I don't think, for instance, that people have the right to murder other people. I don't think they have the right to steal from other people. There's kind of an inexhaustive normative list of things that I think we would likely agree on. But on the other hand, I don't see egalitarianism as being a fundamental human right. Never have. I think it's, like I said, in many cases, it's laughable like this one. I certainly don't see OnlyFans as a right. I don't see speech as being necessarily a right. I don't see any of those types of things as being fundamental to the human experience or a human right. So I think you and I would see rights very differently. But unless you have a criticism of those things, which I'm happy to get into, you still are kind of question begging with the whole idea that, well, wait a second. No, it's the majority that gives rights. It's not the majority that gives rights. It's men that give rights. Men are the ones who can bestow them upon you, and they're the ones who can take them away. We know this because collectively women cannot and have not ever been able to do this. Ever.
I was saying that because you were using the thought experiment of imagine 80% you're at war, and then if 80% of the people at war are women and 20% of men, who do you think would win? And I was saying that instance, I think it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that the women would win, but you were disagreeing with that. But let's say they did win. Do women now have a basis for rights?
If women were able to physically overpower and take their rights and give them to themselves somehow, sure. All you have to do is show me where that's ever happened. And I'm happy to say, hey, sometimes they do that, but they don't ever do that and have not ever been able to do that. And the reason they can't do that is because, well, men are way fucking stronger and way more aggressive and have higher testosterone. And it seems to bother them far less to kill things than it does women. So that's why. Essentially, women are completely under the thumb of men. And everything outside of that is basically just an illusion. It's an illusion that we tell ourselves, but you're always appealing to men for your rights. There's no way around it.
Okay, I guess I'm still trying to wonder why you're only applying this idea that if you can't physically enforce the rights, that means it's laughable just to women again, if you're not applying it again.
That's not what I'm saying. I'll say it again.
Children, handicapped. Maybe I'm missing.
I'll say it again. Say it again. Pretend for a second that there was a God, not the God, right? We'll just pretend that there's a God. And the God comes down and says, you and I are now equal. You can do everything I can do except all the things that you can't do that I can do. But we're totally equal. Would you agree? Or if the God says to you, you and I are now equal. You just can't do all the things I can do. Right? I'm going to make you a God just like me, but you can do all the things that I can do except certain things that you can't. Are you equal with that person, or are you not equal with that person or that entity?
I don't know if having the same strengths, again, is the basis for rights. Like I'm saying, I think we establish rights because we're accepting that people.
Yeah, but just to the thought experiment, would you say that you were equal with that being or not?
No, I don't think.
Right. You don't think. Right.
Yeah.
You don't think that because that would be absurd and laughable and paradoxical. That the being who says to you, now let's say the being says, now all the things I just gave you, I can also take away if you displease me, but we're equals. Do you think that you would actually be equal with that being or no?
Okay, wait. So you're saying the idea that women's equality to men is laughable, but are you saying the basis of women's rights is laughable or just the equality?
Well, I've already said this, that I think that women have the same rights as men do. In this particular case, whatever men decide to give them, it'd be the same thing that men decide to give other men. That's how traditionally it's always been done in every single society that we've ever been in. So, I mean, nobody in any society that I'm aware of as normative frame is able to just like murder women because they want to. That's pretty absurd. So as far as fundamental rights go, because you and I see rights differently, yes, I think that women would have the same kind of rights I would express that men have, but it still would be a truism that men are the ones who are granting those rights.
Okay, so then to kind of pivot slightly, given that, like, I'm guessing you don't support feminism, or do you still support feminism even though you think feminism is useless because...
Well, this is why I asked your definition. Well, I didn't even really have to ask because you kind of let me know what you thought feminism was in the opening. And in the opening, what you said that feminism was a move towards egalitarianism and equality between men and women. So if that's the basis of feminism, then feminism would indeed be laughable, because again, you would just be calling this grouping and monolith and saying that they have equality with the very people they're appealing to for equality, who can then take it away whenever they so choose.
I don't think I gave a sameness definition of feminism at all.
I didn't say you did. And I said you said it was about equality.
What?
You said it was about equality.
Yeah, that's what sameness feminism is. I think I was saying that modern feminism is about not devaluing feminine traits. I don't think I said that feminism is about propagating that men and women are equal.
Andrew, can I very quickly, I want to really quickly clean up your position for the chat, because Rachel, your wife, was saying what your position is. So I want to make sure this is accurate. So you're talking about the what is, right? But what about in terms of ought to? Do you believe that women ought to have rights as well, or you're just talking purely about the what is?
Well, I've already covered that, right? So yes, of course, I think that they ought to have the same rights.
Okay.
Ordinarily, that I would ascribe in a Christian virtue ethic to anybody. Sure.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I don't think that that's in any way contrasted to anything I say.
No,
I'm just saying that even then, I would still understand on the is front that those rights, whether I think they come from God or not, I still believe that men would be the ones who are going to ultimately be the enforcement arm for them, and the ones who could take them away from me or give them to me whenever they so choose to do so, which historically they've done many times.
Okay, so if men are the enforcement arm, what do you think they ought to be enforcing then? Like, what rights do you think should be taken away from women, or do you think you should still extend equal rights to women, even though you could theoretically take them away?
You mean, as I'm trying to figure this out, what are you asking me?
I guess I'm asking what your point is. Like, I guess you're saying that men can take.
My point is that you're not equal to men, that women aren't equal to men because you can't enforce their own rights. Men have to enforce them for them. So they're begging at the altar for men to enforce their rights while at the same time saying that they're equal to men. It's absurd. They're not equal to men. They're never going to be, there's never going to be an egalitarian society because of this one fact, that men can collectively, whenever they so choose, even in a small collective, just snatch your rights away and there's nothing you fucking do about it. That's what I'm saying. That's why feminism is absurd. That's why the girl power shit's all fucking absurd. It's all stupid. It's all retarded. Makes no sense, because you're appealing to the people who could take your rights away for your rights and saying you're equal with them. It's absurd. That's not. And if that's not the position, then that's not feminism, because that's what feminism is. It's a push towards the egalitarian nature of men and women, saying that we're equal in every way. We're almost interchangeable widgets. That's what it's saying. That's what its proposal is.
I think feminism, or at least in like the girl power strand that you were just describing, is saying that even though women are physically inferior to men, I don't think most women or the average feminist is going to argue that women are physically equal to men or could physically overpower a man typically. I think they're more so saying that they're generally as intellectually capable. Obviously, in the most extremes, I think if you're comparing extremes, I think the most intelligent people are men, and then also the dumbest people are men. But just in general, the average pools of men and women are generally equally as smart. So I think like the girl power strand of feminism is just saying that women are just capable in the workforce. They're just capable of making decisions. How does even what you were saying relate to that? To those virtues of feminism?
So this is a pivot to kind of a whole different topic, which I'm willing to get into. But before I do jump into that with you, Can you make the concession that women's rights come fundamentally from men?
I would make the concession that rights are established by the government in the nation you live in, and then that the government is usually spearheaded by men. Yeah. If you don't,
That's not what I'm asking. Can you agree, or do you still disagree that your rights, women's rights, fundamentally come from men? Do you agree or disagree with that? Because if you agree with that, you can concede and we can move off of this point.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, hey, we can hear you.
Okay, I was plugging in my phone. Sorry, repeat that one more time.
I said, so again, I need to ask you one more time. Can you make the concession that women's rights come from men? If you make that concession and concede that point, we can move on to the next point.
I don't think I can. I think I would. I'm not extremely religious, so I can't give you like a clean theological basis for rights. But I don't think I would agree with that.
Yeah, right. But
I wish I had a better definition.
This is why we keep on.
I still wouldn't make that concession.
Right. This is why we keep on going round and round on this, right? Because I make an argument, you end up inevitably agreeing with what I'm saying, but you still won't make the concession on the point because it collapses a large portion of your worldview. This is very common with feminists. You see what I'm saying? Hang on.
Saying that who's able to enforce those rights isn't equivalent to the basis of those rights. So I was saying just because rights can be violated by men, I don't think that means the basis of those rights is male determined. Does that make sense? Nope,
it doesn't. You're still within the realm of the paradox. So let me try this a different way. What I'm saying to you, the reason I often make this just normative statement to a feminist, that their rights are dependent and reliant on men and men's benevolence. Because if we're malevolent, if we're acting in an evil way, we tend to subjugate, enslave, and things like this, right? But the reason I make this point, even though it's very normative, is because I think most people who are rational agents would just have to kind of agree that it's true on its face. There's really no way to argue with it. But the reason we end up going round and round and round in a circle, and you look more and more absurd every time we circle it again, is because you won't concede to it because it collapses a portion of your worldview. Men are the enforcers of your rights, not women. Do you agree or disagree with this statement?
I agree that your rights can be physically infringed upon, but I don't know if that's the same as saying that because it can be infringed upon or violated, that means the basis of the right doesn't exist. I guess that's my contention.
Well, who gives you these rights other than the agents who are enforcing them on your behalf? You're not giving them to yourself. So you didn't wake up one morning. You didn't wake up one morning.
I guess political rights are given by men. I'll concede on that. In terms of human rights, I guess I would have to probably research more and think about where I think human rights fundamentally come from. I guess I do see human rights as slightly different than politically afforded rights.
Okay, so where do human rights come from?
Like I said, I think I would have to probably give it a lot more thought.
I think that that's a fair answer. So I don't expect you to have it. That's a difficult question. So I think that that's a fair answer.